Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching Sit Down. It's the Republican Senator from Iowa. Joni Ernst is here with us. Brand new Simon Schuster book. Joni, how are you?
I am great. Thanks, DJ. I appreciate this a lot.
Of course, it's called The Daughter of the Heartland, my ode to the country that raised me. And Senator, you go through it all, the ups, the downs. What was it like reliving all this?
Well, I tell you, it just started many years ago when I was born in Southwest Iowa, lived and raised on a farm there. Great folks that taught me the value of hard work, and that truly no job is beneath me. Nothing is beneath me. Working with my hands and understanding the challenges that farming brought. Sometimes there were good years and sometimes there were really, really tough years that my parents had to, keep all of us kids together and make it through. But it really taught me a resiliency that lasted through my career in the military, as well as my civilian life, on through personal challenges that I had, and then taking me all the way to the United States Senate. So truly it is a story about recognizing we can overcome challenges and go on to do great things in our lifetimes.
Yeah, no question about it. And obviously a ton of different challenges in the world right now. Specifically for farmers in Iowa, you've lived that life from a mental health perspective, from an economic perspective. What are the farmers struggling the most with right now?
It is very challenging, and especially when you take some of the trade negotiations that have gone on for a number of years, which has interrupted some of the supply and demand that we see through our ag country. That has presented challenges, but then you take COVID-19 and you put it on top of those already existing challenges, it becomes very difficult. And while the federal government is providing aid to our farmers, that's not what our farmers want. They're used to being self-sufficient. They are the ones that will step in and help out a neighbor. They never want to ask for those things for themselves. And so our mantra across the Midwest is trade, not aid. And with COVID-19, it's just made it very difficult. And as you mentioned, mental health for our farmers, it does create a significant challenge where they're raised to be very stoic, keep that stiff upper lip. That's kind of how we do it in the Midwest. And it's hard to reach out and recognize when you are coming to a breaking point. And so I have worked on those challenges in the United States Senate, ensuring that we have resources necessary for our farmers to reach out and talk to someone, get those support systems that they might need if they are feeling down, if they are feeling depressed. I've always been very active in the veteran suicide space, but it was unbelievable when I started working with a number of my Democratic counterparts, figuring this out. We found out that farmers actually, by occupation, have the largest percentage of suicide rates. So, we made it our purpose to go back and support those farmers. And it is a very challenging time right now.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot going on. And, going back into your story, obviously people have great lives on the farm. And for you, that was something that early on, it was a part of your situation, but then you kind of wanted to do some more. So obviously you have a history of people in the military in your family, but when does that idea of service really come about? Because you're at Iowa State, you're trying to figure things out. When do you realize, like, you know what, I want a little something more besides life here on the farm?
Yeah, it was while I was at Iowa State, and I was blessed to be selected for an agricultural exchange. And this was in 1989. And that exchange took place in the Soviet Union.
That's crazy that you were able to do that at that point.
Unbelievable. So now in my young mind, the United States was a world superpower and still is. And then there was the Soviet Union, another immense world superpower. And so, in my young and inexperienced mind, I'm thinking that they must have the same types of opportunities for their citizens and, just comparing the two countries. But what I found when our group from Iowa arrived in the Soviet Union, we stayed on a collective farm in Ukraine, and it was very different. Now, I came from a very small family farm. We didn't have a whole lot growing up. But what we did have was indoor plumbing, we had tractors, we had a refrigerator, we had a telephone. And you know what? The folks I stayed with on that collective, they had none of those things. And so it was a stark contrast. And when we came together in the evenings to really talk about the exchange, and I'll remind you, it was an agricultural exchange. So we thought we would be talking about Iowa agriculture versus the way they farm in Ukraine. But that first night when we came together at the community center, the Ukrainians, all they wanted to know, and that first question was straight out, what's it like to be an American? And it was at that point that I understood fully the challenges that they had in the Soviet Union and the opportunities that I had in the United States. So I decided when I got back to Iowa State University for my fall semester, I just decided I can't take my life for granted anymore. I can't take my country for granted anymore. And the way I figured I could give back was by serving in the armed services.
And then the people from Ukraine got to come and experience Iowa as well, which is pretty cool.
And they did. And we hosted the young men and women that those of us had stayed with in Ukraine. They were able to complete the exchange that next summer. They came and they were just in awe at the abundance of resources and goods and opportunities that we had. And I just remember the young ladies that stayed on my family farm. I mean, we went in, it was a Kmart, a local Kmart in Red Oak, population 7,000. And we went into the store and the girls started crying because there were racks and racks of clothing. There were shoes available for purchase. There were cosmetics. There were radios. There were all kinds of things that they were not able to purchase in Ukraine. And so, of course, they're buying all these blue jeans. And the young lady I had stayed with, she had traced her brother's foot on a piece of paper and brought that piece of paper with her. And we were able to find a pair of tennis shoes that we thought would fit his feet. And she was just so thrilled to be able to take these things back with her to her family because they didn't have access to those things in the Soviet Union. So it was just a really great experience, and learning how other people live in other countries, what they have available to them and what they don't. But it just made me very proud to be in a country where we could determine our life story. It wasn't determined by our government. So again, just very proud. And that's the title of my story, my ode to the country that raised me. I'm just so thankful that I have those opportunities.
Well, speaking about learning about other people from around the world, let's talk about your service overseas, because one of the things I didn't realize is that 100,000 people from the Iowa National Guard go and serve overseas, and there you are in the middle of a war. And what was most surprising about that whole experience? Because you go into the sexism involved in the military, life driving around there. What just really blew your mind about everything going on?
Well, the thing that blew my mind, of course, initially was the fact that it was utter chaos trying to get into the country. And so we were really existing hour by hour, not knowing where we would end up as a unit, who would be our parent. We didn't even know who our parent unit would be. We were like lost children when we initially went into Kuwait. And the reason that is because initially the plans to go into Iraq were to go through Turkey. And then Turkey at the very last moment said, hey, United States, you cannot use our country to go into Iraq. And so every American unit, every other country's units were directed into this little tiny country known as Kuwait, which can only hold so many people and so much equipment at any given time. Getting equipment into the ports was extremely difficult. And so it was chaos. Eventually all of that settled down and we got settled into Kuwait and were able to run our missions up into Iraq. And mostly we did deliveries around Kuwait, but it was just a very challenging time being a company commander. I had phenomenal soldiers, though. I tell you what, they put their heart and soul into their work, whether they're driving a truck, whether they're ordering supplies, whether they're turning a wrench under a truck. All wonderful people. And they went through a lot of hardships, a lot of hard times, but they stuck together. We came through it together, and everybody came home.
One of the things you talk about is that you outranked a lot of these men, but you still got crap from a lot of the guys that you dealt with. So when you think about just women in the military, because later on in the book, you talk about things have definitely improved, we're definitely making progress, but what are the biggest challenges for women in the military? And specifically for you at that time, what did you struggle with the most in dealing with guys who were under you, but felt as though they could treat you a different way?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that now I had a lot of respect from the men that were in my company, but certainly men that were in other companies, they didn't give a what. So they were, very macho, and a lot of them, it was because they were combat arms, they were infantry. So a lot of them thought, I'm all that in a bag of chips, and the heck with you guys, you're just transporters. And having a very dismissive attitude, not only for my rank, but then also for my chosen branch, what I chose to do in the United States Army. But then because I was a female, I was even less so, according to them. And there was an instance where we eventually had shower trailers where we could go take a shower, and the women had one shower trailer dedicated to us because we were a small minority. And then the men had all of the other shower trailers. So we were in a secluded location, but there was this group of men from this other unit, and they were standing outside the door to the women's shower trailer. And every time one of our women would open the door to go in or come out, they would take their phones and snap pictures, trying to get snapshots of women in various states of undress in the shower trailer. And I saw them doing that. So I marched over, it was just me, and I told them to stop and get rid of those pictures. They could care less. They refused to leave. And it wasn't until I went and got one of my maintenance guys who, love him, big, burly guy. He came over with me, and he gave them a what for, and they didn't want trouble with him, so they left. But because I was a woman, I was smaller, I wasn't, a combat arms dude, they really didn't care. So, going through those things, we've got to break through that, and we've got to get over that mentality that as a woman, you can't be a significant leader and you can't have authority and presence. And certainly my logistics guys are just as important as the guys on the front line. We're the ones bringing them their beans and their bullets, enabling them to survive. So there was a lot of that tension that existed even between our own American forces. And then you throw in other forces from other countries too. And it does create this push and pull, but we got through it. And I am excited to say we've seen a lot of change in the past decade in our United States military. Women are serving in combat arms. I'm so proud of those that have that intestinal fortitude and the strength to drive through some of those challenging schools in order to, either gain their infantry blue cord or to gain the Ranger tab, whatever it is. Those women are to be commended. They are breaking barriers, and I'm so proud of them.
Senator, it takes having conversations like this, and even in your own personal life. I mean, you read about getting raped when you were with your previous boyfriend, and domestic abuse that you suffered with your ex-husband. And that's something that's really personal, but there's so much to be learned from you speaking out about that. So what was the most difficult part about writing about those parts of your life, and what can people learn from your story?
It was really hard. And those were stories that I had hoped never to share with the public. I'll be honest about that. And I believe that any survivor should have the opportunity to decide when he or she comes forward. We shouldn't force it from anyone. They know when is the right time to share their story. But through the course of my very public divorce, that information came out. And so I was put in a very, very tender position where I wasn't personally ready to share that information. One, because I didn't want my family to experience the hurt that I had felt so many years ago, and I know how friends go through this, because I did have friends that I had shared my rape with many years ago, and they were hurt because there was nothing that they could have done for me. And so sharing that information, it was very hard. But what I started witnessing was women and men, because I had a couple men reach out to me as well. And they would send me emails or letters or come up to me after one of my town halls. And they would say certain things like, Joni, I understand. And you just know that they truly do understand. But there was one woman in particular that came up and she said, Joni, in spite of all of that, you were a battalion commander. You went on and you're serving in the United States Senate. And she's like, what you're showing is that anything is possible. And so that's what really hit me and inspired me to go on and just be open and honest about what has happened in my life. And the important takeaway that I want men and women to take out and away from this book and from my story is that, you know what, we're all going to experience certain challenges, whatever that might be. But we don't have to let those challenges define who we are as a person. And we don't have to let those challenges hold us back. We can be not victims, but survivors. And so I choose to take the path of survivor. Those things were very hurtful to me. I hate that I wasn't able to choose my own time to tell my story if I ever would have. But I do believe that can help other people now. And so many people have stated that too. It's almost a relief for others to know somebody else has been through this and they still have gone on to achieve wonderful things in their lifetime and find joy. And I really do have joy in my life. And so I'm glad to have some of those dark days behind me. I know there will be other bumps in the future, but you know what? We'll drive on. We'll drive on.
That's really beautifully said. And, one of the incredible things too is that you've received support from across the aisle. It's a phone call from President Trump, and it's also Bernie Sanders reaching out to you. And
yes.
Your story kind of speaks to the fact that there are ways to work across the aisle when it comes to these issues in Washington. So whether it's working with Elizabeth Warren or your friendship with Kirsten Gillibrand, what is the key to doing more of that, especially in such polarizing times that we live in right now?
Well, the funny thing is when I was at an event and it was largely a Republican event, but it was professional women in Des Moines. And we just got together for, a get together at a friend's house. And, the women I was with, they're more moderate women. They're educated. They're wonderful thinkers. And we were talking about bipartisanship. And so I started naming off all of these bills that I have done with Democrats. And that's really important to me, is to try and work with other people that have differing views slightly. But if we have a shared passion, let's find a way forward. And I was listing these bills off, and the women that were kind of in this little group, they started chuckling, and it didn't hit me until they all started laughing that as I was naming off all of my co-sponsors, they were all women. So, I do think that there is a certain bond that we can have, whether Democrat or Republican. There are certain issues that we really enjoy working together. And so whether you're a man, woman, R or D or I, it doesn't matter. If you have a passion, why on earth should we not be working to find solutions together? So while I might be able to work on military sexual assault with Kirsten Gillibrand, there might be another issue that Kirsten and I are completely opposite on. But that's okay, because we have our shared passions and we know that we can turn to each other and talk through different situations. So I think we need a lot more of that, a lot more understanding that just because you may have a different letter behind your name, it doesn't mean you're the enemy. It just means you're going to be a different type of collaborator on a shared passion. So I think we should show a little bit more of that, come together, find a path forward. We know that whatever answer we arrive at, it may not be the 100% solution, but at least it is a solution. And it's that first step in what could be a very long journey, but you know what? You got to take that first step.
Empathy and compassion go a long way, especially in today's world. And, you know, Senator, in addition to everything else going on, you have a re-election campaign that you're focused on. When you think about your time as a senator so far, what are you most proud of, and what's the message that you want people to understand as you go for that re-election?
You know, and thank you. I can't narrow it down to probably proudest moment, because I think there have been so many significant achievements through the past 6 years. But one thing that I can share is that, you know, the way we are raised certainly impacts the way we will legislate. The experiences we have in our lifetime will definitely direct us towards a certain, you know, solution. And so one of the things that I am very proud of is securing funding for the Cedar Rapids Flood Mitigation Project. And I had worked as a National Guardsman during the floods of 2008 in Cedar Rapids. And so I witnessed firsthand the devastation that some of those families and businesses went through in Cedar Rapids when their community was destroyed by floodwaters. And so that made a lasting impression on me. And so when I got into the United States Senate, I made it a mission to go out there and actively get to know the people in areas of authority that would help me secure that funding for that flood mitigation project. And 10 years later, we were able to get $117 million into the community of Cedar Rapids and get that project going to protect that community. Now, the key there is that Cedar Rapids is probably not a city that would likely support me, you know, in my efforts. They do lean more Democratic, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that these are Iowans. I witnessed that devastation firsthand. They are human beings, and we need to protect this vibrant community. You know, that again, going back, R's and D's, it shouldn't matter as long as we have a shared passion. And we were able to come together as city leaders, as my team, and find a way forward for them. And I wish we could all do, again, just a little more of that. And I think that we would have a much brighter state and a much brighter union.
Well, Senator, I really appreciate you taking the time. Learned a lot about you. I mean, your book has everything from stories about Chuck Grassley and John McCain to telling Ted Cruz to shut up in a meeting. So we get a little bit of everything here. I really appreciate you jumping on, and best luck with everything going forward, all right?
I appreciate it so much. Thank you for the time today.